Eleanor Ashbourne set her teacup down so carefully that the porcelain didn't make a single sound. Then she looked at the girl standing in the center of her drawing room, the girl her son wanted to marry, and she said it the way a judge delivers a sentence of death. "She is not worthy of our family." No one moved. No one breathed. Amelia Carter did not flinch. She did not look down. She looked straight into the Duchess's pale blue eyes and thought one thing only. "You are hiding something, and I am going to find it." She had no idea that finding it would cost her everything, including the father she thought she knew. If this story already has your pulse running, subscribe right now, hit that bell and follow every part to the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Amelia Carter's entire life changed. She was elbow deep in the guts of a broken pocket watch and arguing with her father about whether a cracked mainspring could be salvaged or had to be replaced entirely. "You always want to save everything," she said, holding the damaged spring up to the light from the workshop window. "And you always want to throw things away too quickly," Thomas Carter said, not looking up from his own work table. "Patience, Amelia. Find the source before you decide the thing is dead." She had heard that lesson 10,000 times. She knew it the way she knew how to breathe. But she set the spring aside anyway, because her father had never once been wrong about a broken thing, and she had learned to trust that even when it frustrated her. That was when the knock came at the workshop door. Not a customer's knock, soft and apologetic, the knock of someone hoping they weren't an inconvenience. This knock was 3 sharp strikes, deliberate, and certain, the knock of someone who had never once in their life wondered whether they were an inconvenience to anyone. Her father's hands went still. Amelia noticed. She always noticed when her father's hands went still, because they almost never did. Thomas Carter had the steadiest hands she had ever seen on a living person. Hands that could work a gear the size of a baby's fingernail, without trembling, hands that had never once dropped a tool in the 30 years he had worked in this shop. The stillness was not normal. The stillness was the thing that frightened her. "I'll get it," he said, and his voice was careful in a way it wasn't usually careful. He crossed the workshop. He opened the door. Standing on the step was a man in a coat that cost more than everything inside the workshop combined. He was young, mid-20s, with dark hair and an open, honest face that seemed almost embarrassed by the quality of his clothes. He held his hat in both hands. He looked at Thomas Carter, the way someone looks at a person they have been searching for and are relieved and frightened to have found. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Julian," her father said. Amelia's head came up fast. Her father knew him, already, by first name, without introduction or surprise. "You know each other," she said from across the room. Neither of them answered immediately, and that half-second of shared silence between her father and the man on the doorstep told her more than an hour of explanation would have. "Amelia," her father said, "this is Lord Julian Ashbourne." Julian Ashbourne. She knew the name. Everyone in the county knew the name. The Ashbourne family owned half of Wiltshire and had done so for 300 years. They were the kind of family that didn't enter conversations. They occupied them the way a mountain occupies a landscape. You simply worked around them. "My lord," she said, because her father had raised her with manners, even when circumstances didn't require them. "Please," Julian said, and the embarrassment in his face deepened. "Don't call me that." He stepped inside slightly hesitantly, as though he was asking the workshop's permission. "Mr. Carter, I came because I needed to speak with Amelia. I should have come before this. I know I should have." He stopped, started again. "I've asked her to visit Ashbourne Manor, to meet my family. I sent a letter." "I received it," Amelia said. "She received it," Julian confirmed, and looked at her father with an expression that carried the full weight of a question. He wasn't asking out loud, a question that had something to do with permission, and something to do with history, and something to do with the careful way Thomas Carter was looking back at him. "She makes her own decisions," her father said quietly. "I know." Julian looked at Amelia directly. "I want you to come. I need you to come. My mother she has agreed to meet you, but only because she doesn't yet know how serious I am. And I am very serious, Amelia. I am more serious than I have been about anything." Amelia looked at her father. He was watching Julian with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not quite approval, not quite sorrow. Something precise and old that lived in the space between the two. "Papa," she said, "you knew he was coming." "I suspected," her father said. "That is not the same as saying no." She set down her tools. "What aren't you telling me?" Thomas Carter looked at his daughter for a long moment. His hands back to being still, she noticed. Still again. Wrong again. "The Ashbourne family," he said, "is complicated. Most families are. More than most." He chose his next words with the precision of a man selecting exactly the right gear for a delicate mechanism. "There are things about that family that are not what they appear. Things you may encounter when you go there that will surprise you." A pause. "I want you to remember what I have always taught you about broken things. Don't decide they're dead before you find the source," she said automatically. And the most important piece is almost never the most obvious one." He nodded once, and he said nothing else. She went upstairs, changed into her best dress, and came back down to find Julian Ashbourne standing at her father's work table, looking at the tools laid out across it with an expression she could not read, not curiosity exactly. Something with more weight than curiosity. "Are you ready?" Julian asked when she reappeared. "No, she said honestly. "But let's go anyway." Her father stood in the doorway as the carriage pulled away. She looked back once. He raised one hand. He did not smile. And for the first time in her adult life, Amelia Carter felt afraid of something she could not identify or name. Only sense the way you sense the wrong note in a mechanism before you can hear exactly where it's coming from. The carriage rolled toward Ashbourne Manor, and Thomas Carter went back inside his workshop, sat down at his table, put his face in his hands, and did not move for a very long time. The gates of Ashbourne Manor were the first thing that told Amelia she had miscalculated. Not in her dress, not in her manners, not in her preparation. She had miscalculated the scale of what she was walking into. She had understood intellectually that the Ashbourne family was wealthy. She had not understood, could not have understood without seeing it, what that wealth actually meant in terms of physical space and accumulated power. The estate went on for what seemed like miles before the house itself appeared. And when it appeared, when it finally resolved out of the distance into something concrete and specific, she made herself not react. She kept her face still. She breathed slowly. She thought of her father's hands perfectly steady above the smallest and most fragile gears, and she borrowed that steadiness. Julian was watching her. "Say it," he said. "Say what?" "Whatever you're thinking," she considered. "I'm thinking that whoever built this wanted anyone approaching it to feel very small. And I'm thinking that I refuse to." Something in him relaxed. "Good," he said. The front door opened before the carriage fully stopped, and a butler appeared with the supernatural efficiency of a man for whom the entire world was simply a series of tasks to be executed without visible effort. He took her coat. He spoke to Julian in murmurs. He did not make eye contact with Amelia, which she catalogued as information. Julian walked her through the entrance hall with one hand at her elbow, a light touch but present. She noticed the portraits on the walls. Generations of Ashbournes, all of them looking out from their frames with expressions that said the same thing. The gate and the house and the butler had said, "You are a guest here. Do not forget it." "Julian." She stopped walking. "Before we go in, tell me what happened this morning, with your mother." He stopped too. "She asked me if I had considered the consequences. Of me. Of us. Of the choice." He met her eyes. "I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my life. She told me that certainty was not the same as wisdom. And then she said she would see you, and she said—" He paused. "Tell me." "She said that sentiment was a luxury the Ashbourne family could not afford, and that she intended to determine herself whether you were the kind of woman who understood that." Amelia absorbed this. "Is that a threat?" "It's a test," he said. "Everything with my mother is a test. And if I fail it—" Julian was quiet. "She will not make it easy for us," he said. The drawing room door was at the end of the corridor. Amelia could see its dark wood brass handle closed. On the other side of it was the woman who held Julian's future in her hands. Who held, though Amelia did not yet know the full weight of it, considerably more than that. "Julian," she said. "Yes. Does she know who my father is?" He frowned. "She knows he's a clockmaker." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her confused. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. She wasn't sure yet what she meant. Only that something her father had not said, the way he hadn't said it. The deliberate, careful shape of his silence was sitting in her chest like a stone, and it had gotten heavier the closer they got to this house. "Nothing," she said. "Let's go in." Julian knocked. The voice from inside was immediate. "Come." He opened the door, and Amelia Carter walked into the room that would change everything about who she believed she was. Eleanor Ashbourne was smaller than she expected. That was the first thing she had built the Duchess into something large and intimidating in her imagination, and the woman in the chair was actually quite slight, with the compacted stillness of someone who has learned that physical authority comes from control, not size. She sat perfectly straight. She held her teacup as though it were a natural extension of her hand. She wore dark gray, which against her pale coloring and white hair, created the impression of someone who had reduced themselves to their essential elements and found that black and white were sufficient. Her eyes were pale blue, and they moved to Amelia the moment the door opened and did not look away. "Mother," Julian said, "this is Amelia Carter." The Duchess set down her teacup. One precise movement, not a sound. "Miss Carter," she said. "Your Grace," Amelia said. "Sit down, please." They sat. Tea was poured. The fire in the hearth was the only sound. Then the Duchess looked at Julian and said, "Leave us." "Mother, I am not going to do anything alarming, Julian. I want to speak to Miss Carter privately. You are hovering, and hovering is unbecoming." The faintest edge of something in her voice, affection, may be worn down to its barest expression. "Go." Julian looked at Amelia. She nodded. "Go." He went. The door closed, and the room became very quiet and very small and very much about the two of them. The Duchess looked at Amelia for a long moment without speaking. Not with rudeness, with intention. The look of someone who believes that if you watch a person long enough before they expect to be watched, you will see what they actually are. Amelia sat still and let herself be seen. Finally, Eleanor said, "You are not nervous." "I am," Amelia said. "I'm choosing not to show it." A fractional pause. "Why?" "Because nervous looks like weakness, and weakness invites cruelty. And I'd prefer our conversation not go in that direction." Something moved in the pale blue eyes. Not warmth, but something adjacent to respect, the involuntary reaction of a person who has just encountered something they didn't anticipate. "You are direct," the Duchess said. "My father taught me that indirect people waste everyone's time, including their own." "Your father," Eleanor said, and her voice changed on those two words. Changed in a way that was small enough to miss if you weren't paying attention. And Amelia was always paying attention. "The clockmaker." "Yes." "In Thornfield." "Yes." "How long has he lived there?" Amelia tilted her head very slightly. "My entire life." "Why?" "I am simply building a picture," the Duchess said, and returned immediately to neutral. "What is his name?" "Thomas Carter." Something happened in Eleanor's expression. Minuscule. A slight compression around the eyes. Like a person pressing down on a bruise to confirm it's still there. "And before Thornfield," she asked, "where did he come from?" "He has never said," Amelia said. "I always assumed it was somewhere north. He has northern winters in him, the way he tolerates cold and silence." She paused. "Why are you asking about my father, Your Grace?" "I am asking about you," the Duchess said smoothly. "Your father is part of you." "Most people ask about my education, or my family income." "Most people are looking for easy answers," Eleanor said. "I am not interested in easy answers." She stood an unexpected movement, which made Amelia stand too instinctively. The Duchess walked to the window, stood with her back to the room for a moment, looking out at the estate. When she turned around, her face was composed. Completely composed. the face of a woman who had spent 60 years getting very good at being composed. "Miss Carter," she said, "I am going to be honest with you, because I find that dishonesty is exhausting and ultimately inefficient. You are not what this family requires in a wife for Julian. You have no title, no political connections, no experience in the social obligations that this house demands. Society will not be kind to you, and their unkindness will reflect on Julian and on this family. I am not saying this to wound you. I am saying it because it is true, and because I think you are the kind of person who prefers truth to comfort." Amelia was silent for a beat. "You are afraid," she said. The Duchess went absolutely still. "I beg your pardon. You are afraid," Amelia repeated, and she kept her voice level, not challenging, not soft, just steady and clear. "You have listed all of my deficiencies with perfect accuracy. But the way you listed them, the speed and the precision of it, that's not how a confident person speaks. That's how a frightened one does. You already know the list because you have been rehearsing it, which means you've been frightened of this conversation before it happened." The silence that followed was the loudest Amelia had ever heard. Eleanor Ashbourne stared at her. And in that moment, in the space of 3 full seconds, in which neither woman moved, something happened between them that neither of them had language for yet. A recognition, buried under layers of class and history, and things not yet said but there, real. Then the Duchess said very quietly, very controlled, "You are impertinent." "Yes," Amelia said. "I am also right. You are a clockmaker's daughter." "I am," Amelia said. "And my father taught me that you can't fix a broken thing until you're honest about what's broken. Even if the broken thing is yourself." Eleanor turned back to the window. "Dinner is at 7, she said. It was a dismissal and an invitation at the same time. Amelia recognized both. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the handle. Behind her, barely audible, she heard Eleanor say something not to her, almost to herself, in a voice stripped entirely of its armor. 3 words spoken to the window and the gray autumn light beyond it. "Thomas Carter," the Duchess said, as though the name were a question, as though it were a name she already knew. Amelia's hand tightened on the door handle. She did not turn around. She walked out into the corridor, found Julian waiting 6 feet from the door, with the anxiety of a man who has been counting seconds, and she took his arm and kept walking. "Well," he said. "She's testing me," Amelia said. "Is that bad?" "No," Amelia said. "Testing means she hasn't decided yet. That means there's still something to fight for." She paused. "Julian, does your mother know anyone from Thornfield? Any connection to that village? Anyone at all?" He frowned. "Not that I know of." "Why?" "Because," Amelia said carefully, "when I told her my father's name, she already knew it." Julian stopped walking. "What?" "She already knew it," Amelia said again. "She covered it immediately. She's very skilled at covering things. But I saw it. 1 second, maybe less." She looked at him. "Your mother knows who my father is, and I don't think she's happy about it." Julian stared at her. "Amelia, that can't—" "I'm not wrong," she said. "I never misread a face. My father taught me that too." She began walking again, pulling him gently with her. "I need to find out how they're connected, and I need to do it before she decides I'm too much of a risk to let stay." That evening at dinner, the Duchess conducted her examination. She asked about politics, about estate management, about the responsibilities of an aristocratic household, about parliamentary procedures and social obligations, and the management of tenant workers. She asked about literature, and about law, and about the diplomatic marriages of the previous generation. Some Amelia knew. More she didn't. But every time she didn't know something, she said so plainly, and followed it with what she understood instead, the principle underneath the human logic that connected to it. The way her father's teachings translated across contexts, she had never been formally trained in. "You are remarkably unashamed of what you don't know," the Duchess observed somewhere between the 3rd and 4th course. "Shame doesn't teach anything," Amelia said. Curiosity does. Lord Reginald Julian's uncle, who had appeared for dinner with the ease of a man who considered Ashbourne Manor his natural habitat, leaned forward from across the table. He was a broad, warm-faced man, with the look of someone who found the world genuinely interesting, and was never quite sure why everyone else didn't feel the same way. "Eleanor," he said, "you're making the poor girl run a gauntlet." "I am assessing her capabilities," the Duchess said. "You are terrifying her." "She doesn't look terrified," Eleanor said, and she looked directly at Amelia as she said it. "Do you miss Carter?" "No, Your Grace," Amelia said. "Are you—" A pause. "An honest one?" "A little," Amelia said. "But I find the conversation interesting. You ask better questions than most people." Reginald laughed out loud. Eleanor did not laugh, but her mouth moved very slightly in a direction that wasn't entirely displeasure. "Better questions produce better information," the Duchess said. "I have found that most people ask only what they expect to hear answered." "And you want unexpected answers," Amelia said. "I want true ones," Eleanor said. "They are rarer." After dinner, Eleanor excused herself with the formal efficiency of a woman who had spent 60 years being precisely as available as she chose to be, and not one moment more. Julian walked Amelia to the stairs. Reginald lingered in the hallway with his brandy, watching them with the expression of someone who was enjoying a story and hoping it would turn out well. "She likes you," Julian said quietly at the foot of the stairs. "She is uncertain of me," Amelia corrected. "That's different. With my mother, uncertain is better than decided against." "For now," she said. She looked at him. "Julian, I need to look at your family records." He blinked. "I'm sorry." "The estate records, the financial accounts. I noticed something at dinner, something in the way your uncle spoke about the South Fields. A hesitation." She paused. "My father always said that the way people don't talk about money tells you more than the way they do." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "You noticed that," he said. "I notice small things," she said. "It's a habit. Can you get me access to the records?" "Amelia, those are private family documents." "I know, and I'm asking you to trust me." She held his gaze. "Do you trust me?" "Completely," he said without hesitation. "Then let me look." That night, sleep refused to come. She lay in the enormous bed in the West Wing room, and she turned the day over in her mind, the way her father turned a mechanism, not forcing it, not rushing, just letting the pieces move until they showed her their own shape. Eleanor's reaction to her father's name. The way Thomas Carter's hands had gone still at the door. The look on Julian's face when he first stepped into the workshop, the look that was relief and something older, and something else. Something she hadn't focused on fully until now, lying in the dark with nothing to do but think. There was a clock in the small parlor she had passed on her way to dinner. Old. Tired. A grandfather clock with a worn case and a face that had been repaired many times. She had noticed it in passing because she noticed all clocks. She couldn't help it. It was in her blood and her childhood, and she had registered without processing that the metalwork on the repaired sections had a specific quality, a specific style, a touch she recognized. Her father's touch. She sat up in bed. Her father had repaired that clock. Her father had been in this house. Thomas Carter, who had lived in Thornfield her entire life, who had never once mentioned the Ashbourne name, who had gone still at the sight of their crest on a letter her father had been in Ashbourne Manor, had worked on a clock in this house, had left his signature in metal and careful repair work on a piece that the Duchess refused to remove. Amelia got out of bed. She found a candle, lit it, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and moved silently through the sleeping house. The parlor was dark and quiet. She held the candle up to the grandfather clock, and she looked, really looked the way her father had taught her to look, and there it was. Unmistakable. In the lower left corner of the repaired section of the case, barely larger than her thumbnail scratched with a tool rather than painted, a small mark. A maker's mark, a hawk with its wings folded, the same crest that had been pressed into the wax on the letter that arrived at their workshop. The same mark that was engraved on the oldest tool in her father's kit. The one he kept separately from the others wrapped in cloth, the one he had never once let her use. "He did not just repair your clock," she said softly to no one. To the dark room. To the clock. Her hands were shaking, because she was beginning to understand, not clearly yet, not fully, just the outer shape of it, the way you can see the shadow of something before your eyes adjust to see the thing itself, that her father's connection to this house was not the connection of a craftsman to a client. It was something older. Something that had been buried for a very long time. And the woman asleep upstairs, the woman who had looked at her over a teacup and called her unworthy, had been carrying the weight of it for 30 years. Amelia set the candle down on the side table beside the clock. She put her hand flat against the clock's worn case. She felt the faint vibration of the mechanism working inside, imperfect, slightly irregular, carrying its damage forward through time, with the stubborn persistence of old things that have not yet been given permission to stop. "What did he do?" she asked. "What did my father do for this family?" The clock ticked on. The candle flame held still in the quiet room. And somewhere in the dark belly of the manor, in the rooms where the old records were kept and the old letters were stored, the answer was waiting, patient, as a stopped spring, coiled tight with 30 years of pressure, ready to release the moment someone brave enough and careful enough found the right piece and turned it. Amelia Carter stood in the dark and made herself a promise. She was going to find it. Whatever it cost her, whatever it changed, whatever it broke, she was going to find the source of this silence. Her father had taught her there was no other way. A broken thing left unexamined did not heal. It only got worse. She was back in her room before the house woke up. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed with the candle burned down to a stub beside her, and she thought about her father's mark on that clock. Thought about it the way she worked through a mechanism that didn't make sense yet, not forcing it, not panicking, just turning it slowly and watching what moved. Her father had been in this house. Her father knew the Ashbourne crest. And Eleanor Ashbourne, the woman who had looked at her over fine china and called her unworthy, had gone still as stone the moment she heard Thomas Carter's name. These were facts. She had 3 of them. 3 was enough to build a question from, even if it wasn't yet enough to build an answer. The question was, what was her father to this family? And the second question, moving underneath the first one, like a current under ice. What was this family to her father? She was dressed and downstairs before 7. The butler whose name she had learned was Hartley, and who had the particular gift of appearing exactly where he was needed, without anyone having summoned him, found her in the corridor outside the east wing, and offered without being asked to bring her tea. She thanked him. She asked as naturally as she could manage where the estate office was kept. Hartley looked at her for exactly 1 second longer than was required for simple comprehension. "The estate office, miss. I worked in accounts for my father's business," she said, which was true. "I have a habit of looking at books. It's a hard thing to turn off." Another second of careful assessment. Then, "The estate office is at the end of the east corridor, miss. It is generally locked in the mornings until Mr. Forsyth arrives at 9. "Mr. Forsyth. "The estate manager," Hartley said. "He has managed the Ashbourne accounts for 11 years. "I see," she said. "Thank you, Hartley." She drank her tea in the morning room, and she waited. Julian found her at 7:30, with the look of a man who had slept badly and was trying not to show it. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from her and looked at her with an expression that was partly relief at seeing her still there, and partly something more complicated. "You're up early," he said. "I didn't sleep much." "Neither did I." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "My mother came to my room last night." Amelia went still. "What did she say?" "She said—" He stopped. Started again. "She said you were unlike anyone she expected. She said you were either very brave or very foolish, and she hadn't yet determined which." He looked at his coffee. "For my mother, that is very nearly a compliment." "Very nearly," Amelia said. "She also said she wanted you to stay another day, possibly 2. Amelia absorbed that. "She wants more time to assess me." "Or," Julian said, "she wants more time with you. There is a difference even if she'd never admit it." He looked up. Amelia, last night you said something about the estate records. I did. I've been thinking about it. He set down his cup. I can get you access, but I need to know why. Not because I don't trust you, I told you I do. But because if you find something, I need to understand the context before I can act on it. She looked at him carefully. How much do you know about how the estate has been run? She asked. Enough to know that Forsyth has managed it well. The accounts balance, the reports are sound. My mother reviews them every quarter and has never raised a concern. And do you review them yourself? A pause. No, he said. I have always deferred to Forsyth and to my mother. When was the last time anyone outside the estate office looked at the original books, not the summaries, the original figures? Julian thought about this. Something shifted in his expression, not alarm yet, but its precursor. The expression of a person who is beginning to understand that a question they assumed had a simple answer might not. I don't know, he said. That's what I thought, she said. Take me to the estate office, Julian, please. The estate office was smaller than she expected and more crowded, not with people, but with paper. Ledgers going back decades lined the shelves with the comfortable density of things that have accumulated gradually and without anyone feeling the urgency to organize them. It smelled of ink and old wood, and the particular dusty certainty of a room that considers itself important. Julian had the key. Forsyth didn't arrive until 9, and it was barely 7:30. She had an hour, maybe a little more. She went to the most recent ledgers first, last year, the year before. She opened them on the desk, and she read the way her father had taught her to read numbers, not just for what they said, but for what they didn't say. For the spaces between figures. For the places where the math was slightly too clean, slightly too neat, with the artificial precision of someone who has arranged things rather than simply recorded them. It took her 20 minutes to find the first one, a discrepancy. Small. The kind of thing that would disappear in a quarterly summary. An expense recorded in 2 columns simultaneously, once as a maintenance cost for the Southfields, once as a staffing expense for the same period. The numbers were different amounts, but referred when she traced them back to the same underlying transaction. It wasn't a mistake. Mistakes didn't repeat themselves with such consistency. This had a pattern. She kept reading. Julian sat across the desk and watched her, and she could feel his energy shifting the stillness of someone who is waiting for news and is beginning to suspect it won't be good. The second discrepancy was larger. The third was larger still. She found 7 in the first ledger alone before she heard Forsyth's key in the outer door, and Julian stepped out smoothly to intercept him, spinning some story about needing a document for a correspondence, giving her another 10 minutes while she photographed the figures in her memory with the trained precision of a woman who had spent her childhood memorizing small things. When she came out of the estate office, Julian looked at her face, and his own went serious. How bad, he said. Walk with me, she said. Not here. They walked to the far end of the east corridor before she spoke. Someone has been taking money from this estate for a long time, she said quietly. Not aggressively. Not in amounts that would stand out in a summary review. Small amounts consistently over what I think is at least 8 years. Possibly more. I only had time to go back 4 ledgers. Julian stared at her. That's Forsyth has managed this estate for 11 years. I know. Are you saying Forsyth is... I'm saying the pattern starts somewhere in his tenure, she said. I'm not saying anything else yet. I need to see more books. Amelia. He put his hand on her arm. If this is real, it's real. If this is real, the estate has been losing money for nearly a decade, and no one caught it. My mother reviews those accounts. She reviews the summaries, Amelia said. The summaries are clean. The manipulation is in the original entries, and only someone who knows how to read books at that level would catch it. How do you know how to read books at that level? She looked at him. My father ran a business for 30 years. He kept every record himself. He taught me to read accounts the way most fathers teach their children to read books. She paused. He always said that the numbers a person chooses not to show you tell you more than the ones they do. Julian stood very still. We need to tell my mother, he said. Not yet, she said. Not until I have the full picture. She'll act immediately, I can see that about her. She'll act before we have everything we need. She deserves to know what's happening in her own estate. She does, Amelia agreed. And I will tell her. But if I tell her now with only half the information, she will go to Forsyth directly, and if he knows we're looking, he'll cover the rest. She held his gaze. Trust me. Julian was quiet for 3 seconds. You realize, he said slowly, that you came here so my mother could decide whether to accept you, and now you're investigating fraud in her household. I came here, Amelia said, because you asked me to. The fraud was already here when I arrived. He almost laughed. Not with amusement, with the particular helplessness of a man who has just realized that the situation has become considerably more complex than he planned for, and who is also slightly in awe of the person standing in front of him. What do you need? He asked. Access to the older ledgers, she said. The ones on the upper shelves. And I need you to keep Forsyth occupied this morning. Julian straightened his jacket. I can do that, he said. He could, and he did, with the naturalness of a man who had grown up in a household where managing difficult people was simply part of daily life. He took Forsyth on a long walk of the South Fields, under the pretense of discussing proposed improvements, which gave Amelia 3 uninterrupted hours in the estate office with the older books. She found it in the ledger from 12 years back before Forsyth. Before the careful pattern-embedded manipulation. A set of original accounts in a different hand, older with a precision and clarity that made the subsequent books look muddied by comparison. These early records were beautiful. Every figure accounted for. Every transaction traceable. The estate in those years had been genuinely thriving, not the curated impression of prosperity that the recent summaries conveyed, but real structural sustainable health. She traced forward through the years, watching the health of the estate slowly drain degree by degree, the way a patient loses color over a long illness. Year by year, the numbers grew slightly less precise. Year by year, small adjustments accumulated. Year by year, the distance between the estate's real condition and its reported condition grew wider. And then she found something else. In the ledger, from 9 years back, tucked inside the front cover, not filed, just placed there, as though someone had intended to remove it and been interrupted, was a single folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was not a financial document. It was a letter, handwritten, short, dated 9 years ago. The matter we discussed cannot be resolved through further concealment. I urge you to consider disclosure before the damage becomes irreparable. There is still time to correct this without catastrophe. I will not raise it again, but the choice must be made now. It was not signed. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and slid it into the pocket of her dress. She was back in the morning room, with her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea, and her expression arranged into something calm and pleasant, before Forsyth and Julian returned from the fields. Forsyth, a compact-contained man in his 50s with the eyes of someone who was always slightly calculating. The room glanced at her as he entered. A quick assessing glance. Then away. The glance of someone who had filed her as unimportant. She noted that. She noted everything. Julian caught her eye across the room and raised an eyebrow. She gave him the smallest nod. Later. She'd tell him everything later. But she was thinking about something else now. Something she hadn't let herself think fully yet, because the implications of it were large and unsettling, and she needed to work through them slowly. The letter in her pocket was unsigned, but the handwriting she had looked at it 4 times before folding it. Memorizing the loops and the pressure and the particular way the letters connected was a hand she recognized. Not perfectly. Not with absolute certainty. It had been 9 years and people's handwriting changed, but she had grown up reading notes left for her on her father's work table. Shopping lists and instructions and gentle corrections of her work. She had read that handwriting her entire life. The letter in her pocket had been written by her father. Thomas Carter had written to someone inside Ashbourne Manor 9 years ago, warning them that concealment was no longer viable, urging disclosure. And whoever received that letter had filed it away inside a ledger and left it there, and nothing had changed, and the concealment had continued for 9 more years. She needed to find out who the letter was written to. She needed to find out what her father knew. And she needed to do it before Eleanor Ashbourne decided to trust her or expel her, because once that decision was made, her access to this house closed completely. She was still sitting with these thoughts when the Duchess came into the morning room. Eleanor moved with the quiet authority of a person who never needed to announce herself, because every room she entered simply reorganized itself around her. She looked at Amelia. She looked at the way Amelia was sitting, not relaxed but contained, not anxious but concentrated, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You look like a woman who has found something she wasn't looking for," the Duchess said. Amelia met her eyes. "I was looking for it, Your Grace," she said carefully. "I simply didn't know what form it would take." Eleanor sat down, not across the room in the chair beside her, closer than she had positioned herself in any previous interaction. Another shift, another degree of adjustment that Amelia catalogued as significant. "Tell me what you found," Eleanor said. "In the estate records." A pause. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "You've been in the estate office. Julian gave me access." She paused. "I should have asked you directly. I apologize." "You didn't ask me because you knew I would refuse," Eleanor said, not angrily, observationally. The voice of a woman who respects a strategy even when she's on the losing side of it. "Yes," Amelia said. Another pause. "What did you find?" This was the moment. She had approximately 15 seconds to make a decision to tell Eleanor everything, including the letter, including her suspicion about who had written it, or to hold some of it back until she had more information. She measured the risk. She measured the woman in front of her. She told her everything except the letter. As she spoke, Eleanor's face went through a series of very controlled, very precise changes, the expression of a woman receiving information that is deeply unwelcome and choosing consciously to receive it without collapsing. By the time Amelia finished, Eleanor's hands were folded in her lap so tightly that the knuckles were pale. "You are telling me," Eleanor said very quietly, "that Forsyth has been stealing from this estate. I'm telling you the evidence points in that direction. I don't have the full picture yet." "How long?" "At least 8 years, possibly the entire 11. Eleanor was silent for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "My husband trusted Forsyth," she said. "I trusted Forsyth. I know. I have reviewed those accounts every quarter for 11 years. The summaries," Amelia said gently. "The manipulation is in the underlying entries. The summaries were designed to pass a review. Designed." Eleanor repeated the word as though tasting something bitter. "Yes." The Duchess stood up. She walked to the window, the same window she had stood at the day before, when she delivered her verdict about Amelia's worth. Today she stood there differently. Not performing control, actually seeking it, actually needing the moment of stillness to keep herself together. "What do you need?" she said without turning around. Amelia blinked. "I'm sorry. To complete the picture, to find the full extent of it." Eleanor turned. "What do you need?" "All of the original ledgers, from the past 12 years. Time to go through them properly. And I need Forsyth kept away from the office." "Forsyth will be given 2 weeks paid leave," Eleanor said, "beginning this afternoon. I will tell him it is for the restoration work we planned for the West Annex." She paused. "He will believe it. He has believed far simpler things for 11 years. And the ledgers. I will have Hartley bring them to the library." A beat. "You will work there. I will work with you." Amelia stared at her. "You want to look at them yourself?" "They are my accounts," Eleanor said. "My estate. My responsibility." Something moved across her face, something with the weight of genuine shame in it, though the Duchess would have died before naming it that. "And apparently, I have been looking at the wrong things for a very long time." They worked in the library for the rest of the morning. Amelia showed Eleanor how to read the original entries, how to find the pattern in the discrepancies, how to trace a number from its origin through its final presentation in the summary and see exactly where and how it had been altered. Eleanor was a fast learner, faster than Amelia expected. Within an hour, she was finding irregularities on her own. marking them in a small, precise hand in the margins of the pages with a red pencil she had produced from somewhere about her person. They said very little to each other. They didn't need to. The work had its own language. At one point, Amelia looked up and found Eleanor staring at a figure she had just uncovered, a large one, larger than anything they'd found yet, with an expression that had nothing to do with financial analysis and everything to do with the specific feeling of having been deceived by someone you believed in. "Your Grace," Amelia said quietly. "Don't," Eleanor said. Her voice was very controlled. "Don't say something kind. I don't want kindness right now." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "My father says that the worst part of finding the broken piece," she said carefully, "is not the piece itself. It's realizing how long it's been broken without you knowing." Eleanor looked at her. "He sounds," she said slowly, "like a man with experience of that." Amelia held her gaze. "He does." A silence settled between them, different from the silences of the day before. Not the silence of a test being administered. The silence of two people who have been doing something real together and are resting in it. It was Eleanor who broke it. "Tell me," she said, "about your father. Not the clockmaker, not the teacher, the man." She folded her hands on the table. "What is he like?" The question surprised Amelia enough that she answered it honestly without guarding herself. "He is very quiet," she said. "People mistake that for simplicity. He is not simple. He is the most complicated person I have ever known. He simply chooses not to perform his complexity." She paused. "He loves carefully. He doesn't say it often, but everything he does is organized around it. The way he teaches, the way he works, it's all the same thing. He cares about things being repaired and working and lasting." She looked at her hands. "He never speaks about his past, before Thornfield, before me. It is the one part of him I have never been able to reach." Eleanor was completely still. "How old is he?" she asked. 61, Amelia said. "He'll be 62 in February." Something happened in Eleanor's face, a small private calculation, and then immediately the wall going back up not quite fast enough. "He never married?" Eleanor asked. "My mother died when I was 3, Amelia said. "He didn't remarry. He always said he had enough to love between me and the broken clocks." A pause. "He said it lightly, but I think he meant it heavily." The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked down at the ledger open in front of her. She put her hand flat on the page, a gesture that was not about the ledger. "Miss Carter," she said. "Yes, you asked yesterday whether I was afraid." She didn't look up. "You were correct. I am afraid, but not of what I told you yesterday." A pause, each word chosen and placed with enormous care. "There are things that happened 30 years ago that I have never spoken of. Things that shaped this family in ways that no one in this house fully understands. I made choices that I believed at the time were the right ones." She finally looked up. "I am beginning to wonder if I was wrong." Amelia's heart was moving fast. "What kind of choices?" she asked. "Choices about what to protect," Eleanor said. "About who to protect. And about what I was willing to sacrifice in order to protect it." She looked at Amelia directly, the pale blue eyes clear and very serious. "Your father's name," she said. "Thomas Carter." A pause that lasted long enough to matter. "That is not the name he was born with." The air went out of the room. Amelia heard her own heartbeat. "What?" she said. "I said that is not the name he was born with." Eleanor's voice was careful, controlled, but underneath it, something that had been held for 30 years was beginning very slowly to move. "I cannot tell you everything today. I need time. I need to find the words for something I have never said out loud." She straightened. "But I can tell you this. The man in Thornfield, the man who raised you, who taught you to read accounts and fix broken things and move through the world with a kind of courage that I have been watching for 2 days now and cannot fully explain." She stopped. "He did something for this family," Eleanor said. "Something that cost him everything. And I let him pay that cost because I was too afraid to stop it." The sentence landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Amelia was on her feet without knowing she had stood up. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me what you know about my father." "Not yet," Eleanor said. "Not until I can do it properly." She met Amelia's eyes. "I promise you. I promise you on the name of every person in those portraits in the hallway. I will tell you everything, but I need one more day." Amelia stared at her. Every instinct she had was screaming. Every part of her that was her father's daughter, patient, precise, disciplined, was in direct conflict with every part of her that was simply a daughter. A daughter who had grown up with a father full of careful silences, and who had always trusted that the silence was protecting her, and was now for the first time genuinely afraid of what it had actually been hiding. "One day," she said. "One day," Eleanor confirmed. "And in the meantime," the Duchess said, "we finish what we started." She looked down at the ledger. "We find everything Forsyth has done. We understand the full damage, and then we address it." She picked up her red pencil. "Together." Together. The word sat between them like something fragile. New. Not yet tested for weight. Amelia sat down. She opened the next ledger, and she understood for the first time something her father had never said directly, but had always been teaching, that the act of repairing a broken thing was not solitary work. The best repairs, the lasting ones, the ones that held, were always collaborative. One person to hold the piece steady. One person to turn the mechanism. Both of them watching for the moment it clicked back into place. They worked until the light in the library changed from morning white to afternoon gold. At some point, Julian appeared in the doorway, looked at the two of them, sitting side by side over a spread of open ledgers, and stood very still for a moment, with an expression on his face that Amelia could not quite read from across the room. Something between astonishment and the particular relief of someone who has been hoping for something so long that when it begins to happen, they're almost afraid to name it. He didn't interrupt. He left quietly and came back an hour later with a tray of food that he set on the side table without comment and left again. Eleanor didn't acknowledge it, but she reached for a piece of bread without stopping her work, which Amelia recognized as its own kind of acknowledgement. By late afternoon, they had a number. It was a large one. Large enough that Eleanor set down her red pencil and sat back in her chair and was silent for a full minute. 11 years, she said finally. Yes, he has been doing this for 11 years. The earliest I can confirm is 10 years and 3 months. But the pattern at the beginning is different, less confident. I think he started smaller in the first year testing. She paused. He became more confident when no one caught it. Because no one caught it, Eleanor said. Because no one was looking at the right level. The Duchess was quiet again. Then she said something that Amelia did not expect. Your father would have caught it, she said. Amelia looked at her sharply. What? A man who taught his daughter to read accounts this way. Eleanor gestured at the table. He would have caught this in the first year. She met Amelia's eyes. What I am trying to say, Miss Carter, is that if your father had been here, if the man I knew 30 years ago had stayed... She stopped herself. The sentence hung unfinished, and in the space where it ended, Amelia felt the full weight of everything Eleanor was not yet saying. The man she knew 30 years ago, the name he was born with, the choices made, the cost paid. Eleanor, she said. It was the first time she had used the Duchess's given name. It slipped out, not planned, not deliberate. Just the natural thing to call someone you have spent 6 hours working beside in silence and grief, and something that might, given enough time, become trust. Eleanor didn't correct her. Tell me tomorrow, Amelia said. Everything. Whatever it is. I'm not going anywhere. The Duchess looked at her for a long moment. No, she said quietly. I don't suppose you are. Outside the library windows, the afternoon light had gone completely to gold. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking. Not the old grandfather clock in the parlor, but one of the hall clocks, younger and more reliable, marking off the seconds with brisk efficiency. It didn't know what was happening in the library. It didn't care. Time moved regardless. Amelia gathered the marked ledgers into a careful pile. She thought about the letter in her pocket. Her father's handwriting. 9 years ago. The choice must be made now. Someone had received that letter and done nothing. She needed to know who. She needed to know what choice he had been urging them to make. She needed to know what her father knew about this family that had made him reach out after apparently years of deliberate silence with a warning. But she had promised Eleanor one day. She could wait one day. She was her father's daughter. She knew how to be patient. She stood up from the table, straightened her dress, and looked at the woman who had called her unworthy 48 hours ago. The woman who was now sitting across a table covered in evidence of a decade of betrayal. Red pencil still in hand, looking older than she had 2 days ago, in the way that the truth sometimes ages people when it finally reaches them. "Good night, Your Grace," Amelia said. "Good night, Miss Carter," Eleanor said. A pause. "Amelia," the Duchess said, and her voice was different, stripped of the formal distance. Just a woman speaking another woman's name. "Thank you." Amelia nodded once. She walked to the door. She was almost through it when Eleanor spoke again, and this time the words were so quiet that Amelia almost missed them. "He deserved better," the Duchess said. "He always deserved better than what he got." Amelia stood in the doorway, her hand on the frame, her heart hammering. "Who did?" she asked, but she was afraid she already knew. Eleanor was looking at the window, at the darkening sky, at something that wasn't in the room at all, but 30 years behind her. "Tomorrow," the Duchess said softly, and the clock in the hall ticked on. She didn't sleep again. This was becoming a pattern at Ashbourne Manor, the days full of more truth than she knew what to do with, and the nights too loud with questions for rest to find her. She lay in the dark, and she took out the letter from her pocket and held it without unfolding it, as though the paper itself had weight beyond its physical dimensions. Her father's handwriting. 9 years ago. Written to someone inside this house, warning them that concealment was no longer viable. I had known. For 9 years at minimum, possibly longer, her father had known something about the Ashbourne family that was serious enough to put in writing and send with the urgency of a man who believed it might already be too late. And he had never told her, not one word. She had grown up inside his careful silences and called them peace. Called them, his nature called them, the particular quietness of a man who found language insufficient for the things that mattered most. She had loved him for those silences. She had thought she understood them. She understood now that she had understood nothing. The morning came gray and cold, and she was dressed before it fully arrived. She found Julian in this breakfast room, which by this point felt less like discovering him and more like finding the thing she expected in the place she expected it. He was reading a letter of his own, something from London, from the crease of concentration between his brows. He looked up when she entered. "You look terrible," he said with the honesty of someone who cares too much to be tactful. "Thank you," she said. "I haven't slept." Again. She sat down and poured tea and looked at him directly. "Julian, what do you know about your family 30 years ago, before your father died, before your mother became what she is now?" He set down his letter slowly. "That's a very specific time frame," he said. "I know. What has my mother told you? That something happened, that it cost someone greatly, that she made choices she may have been wrong about." She paused. "And that she would tell me everything today." Julian was quiet for a moment. He turned his teacup in his hands. He had a habit of doing that when he was thinking through something he wasn't sure how to say. She had noticed it in the first week she knew him, catalogued it alongside all the other small things she catalogued about people she loved. "There was a scandal," he said finally. "When I was a child. I was very young, 5 or 6. I remember it only as a pressure in the house. Something that made the adults speak more quietly and stop speaking when I entered rooms." He paused. "I know that someone was blamed for something. Someone connected to the family. I know that person disappeared from society and that their name was never spoken afterward." "Who was it?" "I don't know," he said. "Truly. I asked my mother once when I was older. She told me it was a matter that had been resolved and did not require further discussion." He looked at Amelia. When my mother tells you something does not require further discussion, you learn very quickly not to require further discussion. Your uncle, Amelia said. Reginald. Would he know? Julian considered this. Reginald was an adult when it happened. He was 25 or so. He would remember. A pause. But he has also never spoken of it, not once in my entire life, which means either he doesn't know or he knows and has made the same choice my mother made. To keep it buried, Amelia said. Yes. She was already standing up. Where is he this morning? She asked. Amelia. Where is Reginald Julian? He looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man who has learned over the past 3 days that trying to slow Amelia Carter down when she has decided to move in a direction is approximately as effective as trying to redirect a river with your hands. The stables, he said. He rides every morning at 7. She was out of the breakfast room before he finished the sentence. Reginald Ashbourne was not a complicated man, which was perhaps why Amelia liked him. He was warm, where Eleanor was cold, transparent, where Julian was careful, and he had the ease of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that the world was going to be exactly as surprising and difficult as it chose to be, and there was no particular point in fighting that. He was brushing down his horse when she found him, and he looked up at her approach with the open expression of a man who is never entirely startled by anything. Miss Carter, he said, you're up early. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer me honestly. He studied her face, put down the brush, gave her his full attention with the naturalness of a person who considers full attention the least courtesy owed to someone who asks for it. All right, he said. 30 years ago, she said. A scandal. Someone connected to your family who was blamed for something and disappeared. Who was it? The warmth in Reginald's face didn't exactly disappear. It rearranged itself into something more careful, more private. Eleanor has spoken to you, he said. Eleanor has promised to speak to me today. I am asking you now. That, he said slowly, is a conversation my sister should have. Your sister has been having that conversation with herself for 30 years and not sharing it with anyone, Amelia said. I am asking you because I need to understand what I am walking into when she finally tells me. I need context. I need the shape of it before I hear the details, or I'm afraid of what I might do with the details when they arrive. He looked at her for a long time. You're afraid of your own reaction, he said. Yes. Something in him shifted. He had the expression of a person deciding to trust someone and who is aware in the moment of the decision exactly what it will cost if the trust is misplaced. His name, Reginald said quietly, was Alexander Whitmore. The name landed in the air between them. Amelia had never heard it in her life. Who was he? She asked. How was the second son of a respectable family? A good family, not as old as ours, but solid, honorable. Reginald's voice had taken on the quality of someone reciting something they memorized long ago and have not spoken aloud since. He was Eleanor's closest friend, from childhood. They grew up in the same circles, knew each other before either of them were who they became. A pause. Some people thought they would marry. They didn't. Eleanor married my brother the Duke, and Alexander remained a friend of the family, a very dear friend. What happened to him? Amelia asked. Reginald was quiet for a moment. My brother, he said. The late Duke. He was not always wise with money. He had a particular blindness about certain investments and a particular pride that prevented him from admitting when he was in trouble. He stopped. 30 years ago, he made a series of financial decisions that would have been catastrophic had they become public. The kind of catastrophe that doesn't just ruin a man. It ruins a name, a title, everything the family had built. And Alexander found out, Amelia said. Reginald looked at her with surprise, not that she had said it, but at the speed with which she'd arrived at it. Alexander found out, he confirmed. He was the only person outside the family who understood the full extent of it. He was a man of considerable intelligence, and my brother trusted him with things he trusted no one else with. And he chose to take the blame, Amelia said. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the horse breathing beside them. How do you know that? Reginald said very quietly. Because it's what a person like that does, she said. And her voice was steady, but only barely. A person who loves carefully and doesn't perform it. A person who sees that the alternative is the destruction of everything people he loves have built. A person who is willing to pay a cost that no one will ever fully understand. She paused. He gave up his name, his title, his position. He became someone else. Reginald was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not quite grief, something older than grief. The expression of someone who has lived for 30 years with a guilt they couldn't name to anyone. He disappeared, Reginald said. Society believed the scandal was his, that he had created the financial disaster, that he had falsified the records, that the Ashbourne family had been victimized by someone they trusted. His voice was rough now. My brother didn't stop it. He could have stopped it. He let Alexander carry it. And Eleanor? Amelia asked. Eleanor? He stopped. Tell me. Eleanor tried to stop it, he said. At the very end, when she understood what was happening, what my brother was allowing, she went to him. I was there. She told him she would expose the truth herself if he didn't, that she would not allow Alexander to be destroyed for his cowardice. He looked away. My brother told her that if she said one word, the family would lose everything. The title, the estate, everything. And that her son Julian, who was barely 5, would inherit nothing, would have nothing. The full weight of it settled on Amelia. Not all at once, in increments. The way a structure settles when the ground beneath it shifts. She chose Julian, Amelia said. She chose Julian, Reginald said. And she has lived with that choice every day since. Amelia sat down on the bench by the stable wall because her legs had decided independently of her that standing was no longer something they were interested in doing. She sat, and she breathed, and she thought about her father's hands going still at the sight of a crest on an envelope. She thought about the careful silences, the precision, the way he had always taught her that broken things were never broken beyond repair, as though he was teaching himself that as much as teaching her. Alexander Whitmore, she said. Where did he go after? Reginald looked at her. He looked at her for a very long time, and in that look she saw him arrive at the same place she was arriving at. She saw him measure the probability. She saw him examine the math of it, a clockmaker's daughter, who read accounts like a professional, who fixed broken things by instinct, who had walked into Ashbourne Manor and immediately seen what 11 years of trained eyes had missed. A woman whose father had sent a letter to this house 9 years ago. A woman who had her father's mark on a clock in this very house. Reginald, she said, and her voice broke on his name just slightly, just at the edge. Where did he go? I don't know, Reginald said. I truly don't know. Eleanor tried to find him after my brother died 8 years after the scandal. She tried to find him to tell him he could come back, that there was nothing stopping him anymore. He paused. She couldn't find him. He had disappeared completely, changed his name, changed his life. The man she was looking for didn't exist under any name she knew. She sent someone to look, Amelia said. She sent 3 separate investigators over the years, Reginald said. None of them found anything. Amelia closed her eyes. 9 years ago. A letter in her father's handwriting written to someone inside this house. The matter we discussed cannot be resolved through further concealment. Her father reaching out, making contact, warning them. One of Eleanor's investigators had found him. Not 3 had failed, but at some point one had succeeded. Had found a clockmaker in Thornfield named Thomas Carter. Had made contact. And her father, the man who had given up everything, who had rebuilt his life from nothing, who had been raising her alone in that small workshop, had written back. And nothing had changed. Whoever received that letter had done nothing with it. Had filed it away inside a ledger. Had kept the secret. She opened her eyes. The letter, she said. 9 years ago. Eleanor sent a message to your family through an investigator or received one. Something happened 9 years ago. Someone in this house communicated with a man in Thornfield. Reginald frowned. I don't know about any letter 9 years ago. Eleanor doesn't know either, Amelia said slowly. Or she would have She would have acted. She would have gone herself. She stood up. Someone in this house received communication from Alexander Whitmore 9 years ago and buried it. She felt it click. The way a gear clicks when it finds its proper position. The thing that had been grinding and catching and refusing to settle finally found its place. "Forsyth," she said. Reginald stared at her. "Forsyth has been with this family for 11 years, she said. He came with references that no one verified thoroughly. He took over the accounts. He had access to all correspondence that came through the estate." She was speaking faster now, the pieces assembling themselves into a shape that was both perfectly logical and terrible. He would have known if he knew enough about the family history that information about Alexander Whitmore's location was worth something. Not to Eleanor. Eleanor would have acted immediately, but to someone who wanted leverage, to someone who needed a secret to hold over the family in case his own activities were ever discovered. "How was blackmailing someone?" Reginald said, and his face had gone pale. "Not publicly, not for money. He was already taking money from the accounts. He didn't need more money. But information is its own kind of currency. If he knew where Alexander was, if he had intercepted the letter and knew who Thomas Carter actually was." She stopped herself from saying it out loud. Not yet, not to Reginald. He had protection. He had something that guaranteed silence. "My God," Reginald said softly. "I need to speak to your sister," Amelia said. "Right now." She found Eleanor in her private sitting room, already dressed, already composed, already arranged in the particular way that meant she had been awake for hours, preparing herself for this conversation. On the table in front of her was a small wooden box, old and simple, the kind of box you kept things in that you couldn't throw away, but couldn't bear to look at regularly. The Duchess looked up when Amelia entered. She took one look at Amelia's face and said, "You spoke to Reginald." "I did," Amelia said. "I'm sorry, I couldn't wait." Eleanor looked at the box on the table. "Then you know the shape of it?" "Some of it." Amelia sat down across from her. "I need you to tell me the rest." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Her hands were in her lap. She was doing the thing she always did when she was keeping herself together. By force, perfectly. Still. Perfectly controlled. Every muscle organized against the possibility of visible weakness. Then she reached out and opened the box. Inside were 3 things. A photograph old and slightly faded. A short letter yellowed with age. And a small metal object that Amelia recognized before Eleanor said a word about it. A watchmaking tool. Old. Well used. With a handle engraved with a small crest, a hawk with its wings folded. The twin of the one in her father's workshop. Amelia's hand moved toward it without her giving it permission. Eleanor let her take it. It was heavier than it looked. Warm from sitting in the box, as though it had stored 30 years of the Duchess's careful proximity. "He left it," Eleanor said. "The morning after he disappeared. It was on my doorstep. No note, nothing, just that." A pause. "I have kept it every day since." Amelia set it down on the table between them because her hands were shaking and she didn't want Eleanor to see. "Tell me," she said. "All of it. Please." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the photograph in the box, and she picked it up and she turned it over so that Amelia could see it. 2 young people. A woman of 25 or so, unmistakably, Eleanor younger and unguarded in a way the current Eleanor seemed incapable of. And a man beside her laughing at something out of frame, his head turned slightly so that his face was 3/4 visible. Amelia looked at the photograph, and her heart stopped. The man in the photograph was her father, not Thomas Carter, the clockmaker, worn by years and weather, and a life of careful quiet work. This was a younger version, 20 years younger, 30, but the bones of the face were the same, the line of the jaw, the shape of the hands which she could see at the edges of the frame. "Alexander Whitmore," Eleanor said quietly. Amelia couldn't speak. "How was the most honest person I have ever known," Eleanor said. Not honest in the simple way, honest in the way that cost him something. He told the truth when it would have been easier and safer and more comfortable to lie. He did what was right when doing what was right required him to sacrifice things that most people would never sacrifice. She paused. I loved him. Not the way people assume now when they hear that. I loved him the way you love someone who is the truest version of what a person can be. The way you love someone who makes you believe that goodness is not naive. Her voice was very controlled. When my husband allowed him to be destroyed, when Alexander stood there and took it, and I couldn't stop it, I lost 2 people that day. Alexander. And the version of myself that still believed I was capable of doing the right thing. Amelia was gripping the edge of her chair. He had a daughter, Amelia said. The words came out barely above a whisper. I didn't know that, Eleanor said. For many years I didn't know. A pause. 2 years ago, I sent the third one sent me a final report before he retired. He said he had found nothing conclusive. But he included a detail. A clockmaker in Thornfield named Thomas Carter. A man of approximately the right age. A daughter. 2 years ago. Amelia stared at her. You knew, she said. 2 years ago you knew my father was in Thornfield. You knew he had a daughter. I suspected, Eleanor said. You suspected, and you said nothing. I was afraid. The words hit the room like a stone through glass. Amelia was on her feet. She didn't know when she had stood up. Her body had decided before her mind did, driven by something that wasn't quite anger yet, but was headed in that direction with considerable momentum. You were afraid, Amelia said. Yes. He gave up his entire life. He disappeared. He raised me alone in a village workshop and never once told me who he was or where he came from or what he sacrificed. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she made herself breathe, made herself slow down, made herself think. And you knew. For 2 years you knew he was there and you didn't go to him. I didn't know how, Eleanor said, and her voice finally cracked too, just slightly, just at the edges, 30 years of control fracturing in one place. I didn't know how to face him. I didn't know what to say to a man I had failed so completely. I didn't know how to walk into his workshop and look at him and explain that I had let it happen, that I had chosen my son's inheritance over his life. She put one hand over her eyes. I knew there was nothing I could say, so I said nothing. The room was very quiet. Amelia stood still. She breathed. She thought about her father, about his hands, those impossibly steady hands, about the way he had stood in the doorway and watched the carriage take her away and raised one hand and not smiled. He had known she was coming here. He had suspected at minimum that Julian's invitation was connected to something older. He had said, "Remember what I taught you about broken things." He had sent her, not passively, actively. He had looked at the crest on that letter and gone still, and then told her to go. He had let her walk into this house, knowing that what she would find was not just a difficult mother-in-law, but the entire buried history of his other life. Why? Why would he do that? He knew Julian would come, Amelia said slowly. When Julian came to the workshop, you knew each other, by name, first name. She looked at Julian, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during the conversation, and was standing very still, his face pale. Julian, how long have you known about my father? Julian crossed into the room. He sat down slowly. 6 months, he said. My mother told me 6 months ago, after the third investigator's report. He met her eyes. I am sorry, Amelia. I should have told you before I came to Thornfield. I should have been honest from the beginning. You came to Thornfield to meet him, she said. Yes. You came to the workshop specifically. Yes. And you stayed, she said, and you fell in love with his daughter. He held her gaze. I did not plan for that, he said. I went to meet him, to see him, to understand who he was. And then I met you and... He stopped. Yes, I stayed. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Eleanor. The Duchess had lowered her hand from her face. She was looking at Amelia with an expression that was completely unguarded. Not the face of the Duchess of Ashbourne, not the woman who never lost control, but something underneath all of that. Something much older and much more afraid. He knew, Amelia said. My father knew Julian was your son. Yes, Eleanor said. And he let him come. Let him stay. Let him... She stopped. He let me fall in love with your son. Yes, Eleanor said again. The word sat in the room. Amelia felt the full architecture of it settle around her, all the pieces, all the careful arrangements. Her father, who had read the situation with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years alone, thinking about exactly this possibility. Who had known that the past would eventually arrive at his door in some form. Who had chosen when it arrived in the form of a young lord with honest eyes to open the door and let it in. Who had chosen to send her, because he couldn't come himself, because 30 years of silence had calcified into something he didn't know how to break. But she could. She was his daughter. She broke things and fixed them. It was the only thing he had ever truly taught her to do. Where is he now? Eleanor asked. The question was simple, almost humble, from a woman who had spent 30 years not asking it. He is in Thornfield, Amelia said. In his workshop, where he has always been. I need to see him, Eleanor said. Yes, Amelia said. You do. I don't know if he will. He sent me here, Amelia said. He could have told me to refuse Julian's letter. He could have said nothing, and I would never have known. He chose to let me come. She looked at the Duchess steadily. He's been waiting for someone to come to him for 30 years. He was just too proud and too broken to ask. Eleanor put her hand over her mouth. One breath. Then she lowered it and straightened, and the Duchess came back. Not coldly, not as armor, but as the structure that allowed her to function when what she actually wanted to do was fall apart. There's something else, Amelia said. Tell me. The letter in the estate ledger, 9 years ago, my father wrote to someone in this house. Eleanor frowned. I received no letter. It was intercepted, Amelia said. I believe Forsyth found your investigator's report before you did, or found some earlier communication. And when my father made contact, he intercepted the response. He has been holding that information for 9 years as a form of insurance against his own exposure. Eleanor's expression shifted into something cold and focused. Not emotional fury, but the particular clarity of a woman who has just understood the full dimensions of a betrayal and is organizing herself to address it systematically. He knew where Alexander was, she said. I believe so. For 9 years. Yes. And he said nothing. He needed the leverage, Amelia said. He needed to know that if anyone ever looked too closely at the accounts, he had something large enough to make the family choose silence over exposure. Eleanor stood up. She was not the woman who had delivered her verdict 2 days ago over a teacup with a calm voice and absolutely no mercy. She was something older and more dangerous, a woman who has been patient for 30 years and has just run out of patience. Forsyth will be dealt with today, she said. Fully, completely. I will involve the constable, and I will not be gentle about any of it. She looked at Amelia. And then I am going to Thornfield. Eleanor. Reginald, who had followed them at some point, spoke from near the door. Don't, she said. I'm not stopping you, he said. I'm coming with you. She looked at her brother for a moment. Something passed between them. Decades of shared history, shared guilt, shared silence, and then she nodded. Once, briefly, the watchmaking tool across 2 days of tests and revelations, and 30 years of everything that had happened before either of them arrived in this room. Will you come with me? Eleanor asked. It was not the voice of the Duchess. It was not formal or imperial or carrying the weight of a title. It was simply the voice of a woman who was about to do the hardest thing she had ever done, and knew she needed someone beside her who understood exactly what it meant. Amelia looked at the watchmaking tool on the table, the twin of her father's, the one he had left on Eleanor's doorstep 30 years ago with no note, the one Eleanor had kept every day since. She picked it up. Yes, she said. I'm coming with you. The carriage left Ashbourne Manor at mid-morning. Eleanor sat across from Amelia with her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her eyes on the window. She didn't speak for the first part of the journey, and Amelia didn't press her. She understood now that Eleanor's silences were not coldness. They were the sound of a woman doing very hard internal work, the kind that required all available resources and left none for conversation. It was Eleanor who broke the silence eventually. He used to say, she said, that the most important quality in a person was not their courage or their intelligence. He said those things could be trained, could be developed, could be built up over time. She kept her eyes on the window. He said the most important quality was the willingness to pay the real cost of a choice, not the imagined cost, the actual one. Because most people, he said, make choices based on what they think it will cost them, and are shocked when reality presents the bill. Amelia was quiet for a moment. He still believes that, she said. He says it differently now, but it's the same idea. Eleanor closed her eyes. He's still the same, she said, not as a question. He's older, Amelia said. Quieter. He's worn in the way that people are worn, who have carried something heavy for too long without putting it down. She paused. But yes, he's still the same. Eleanor opened her eyes. Outside the carriage window, the landscape of Wiltshire moved past bare fields, stone walls, the particular gray gold of an English autumn afternoon. Amelia, Eleanor said. Yes, I was wrong, she said. About you. What I said when you arrived. She didn't look away from the window. You are exactly what this family needs. You are exactly what Julian needs. A pause that cost her something visible. And you are exactly what I should have protected 30 years ago when I still had the chance. The carriage rolled on toward Thornfield, toward a workshop at the end of a village lane, toward a man who had been waiting in his way, in his particular careful, patient way for this moment, for 30 years. And Amelia Carter held the watchmaking tool in her hands and thought about broken things and the cost of fixing them, and how her father had spent his entire life teaching her that the cost was always worth paying. She thought she was beginning to understand why. The carriage stopped at the end of the lane. Amelia knew before she looked out that they had arrived. Not because she could see the workshop she couldn't yet, but because her body knew Thornfield the way a body knows home. The particular quality of the air, the sound of the village settling into its midday rhythm, the smell of coal smoke and autumn cold, and underneath both of those faint but unmistakable, the oil and metal smell of her father's work that had been the backdrop of her entire childhood. She got out first. Eleanor came out after her, and Reginald after Eleanor, and the three of them stood in the lane for a moment without speaking. Eleanor looked at the workshop at the end of the path, small stone-walled, a light burning in the window, despite the midday hour, because Thomas Carter always said that good work required good light, and daylight in England was never reliable enough to depend on. The Duchess of Ashbourne stood in a village lane and looked at a clockmaker's workshop and said nothing. Her hands were at her sides, perfectly still. But Amelia could see in the set of her jaw and the particular quality of her stillness that Eleanor was doing what she always did when something was costing her enormously, organizing herself against it, building the internal architecture that would allow her to walk forward when every instinct was telling her that walking forward was going to be the hardest thing she had ever done. You don't have to go in first, Amelia said. Yes, I do, Eleanor said. She walked down the path. Amelia and Reginald followed. The workshop door was unlocked. It was always unlocked during daylight hours, because Thomas Carter said that a locked door told people their presence was unwelcome, and he had never believed in making people feel unwelcome. Amelia pushed it open. The smell hit her first. Oil and metal, and the particular dry warmth of a room where a small fire has been burning all morning. Her father's workbench was covered in its usual organized chaos, gears and springs, and the dismantled bodies of 3 or 4 different timepieces at various stages of repair. Tools laid out in the order he preferred them. The magnifying glass on its stand. The small lamp with the green shade. Thomas Carter was bent over the workbench with his back to the door. He didn't look up immediately. He was in the middle of something she could tell by the particular quality of his concentration, the way his shoulders were set, and his head was angled, the position of complete absorption that meant the outside world had temporarily ceased to exist for him. "I'll be a moment," he said without turning. "Set whatever it is on the table by the door." Amelia didn't speak. She looked at Eleanor. Eleanor had stopped just inside the doorway. She was looking at Thomas Carter's back with an expression that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with 30 years arriving all at once, in one room. The silence stretched. Thomas Carter put down his tool. He straightened slowly. Not because he was stiff, though he was slightly the way men his age were stiff after long hours bent over fine work, but because he had registered something in the quality of the silence behind him. The kind of silence that has people in it. The kind that carries weight. He turned around. He saw Amelia first. His face opened the way it always opened when he saw her, just for 1 second before the control came back. Just that one unguarded second of complete love that he could never quite contain fast enough to hide it from her. He started to say her name. Then he saw Eleanor. He stopped. Not gradually, all at once. The way a clock stops. For a long moment. A moment that lasted considerably longer than any measurable unit of time. Thomas Carter and Eleanor Ashbourne looked at each other across the small width of a village clockmaker's workshop. 30 years of silence between them. 30 years of choices and costs and things not said. Eleanor said his name, not Thomas Carter. The other name. The name Amelia had heard for the first time that morning from Reginald's mouth, and had been carrying since like something almost too heavy for one person. Alexander, Eleanor said. And Amelia watched her father's face do something she had never seen it do in her entire life. It broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just the architecture of 30 years of careful containment developed one crack, and then another, and then the whole careful structure shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. His eyes went bright. His jaw set hard against something that was trying to come out of him. His hands, those impossibly steady hands, gripped the edge of the workbench behind him. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was low and rough, and completely different from the voice he used every day. The voice of Alexander Whitmore, not Thomas Carter. A voice that had been buried for 30 years and was finding its way back up through decades of silence. Then he looked at Amelia, and she saw in that look the full explanation for everything he had never told her. The calculation he had made not once but every day, every year, every time she had asked about his past, and he had carefully redirected her. He had made a choice, and the choice had been her, and he had protected her from the weight of it, the only way he knew how, which was to carry it entirely himself. "You told her," he said to Eleanor, not as an accusation, as a question. "She found it herself," Eleanor said. "I only confirmed it." He looked at Amelia again. "How much?" "How much?" he asked. "All of it," she said. "I know all of it, Papa." The word came out as both names at once, Papa and Alexander Thomas Carter, and the man he had been before. She felt it in her chest as she said, it felt the two versions of him colliding, felt the shape of her childhood rearranging itself around this new understanding of what it had contained. He crossed the workshop. He put his arms around her and held her the way he had held her when she was small and frightened completely with the whole of himself without reservation. She let him. After a moment she pulled back because there were things that needed to be said, and she could feel Eleanor standing behind her with the specific tension of a person who has rehearsed this moment for years and is now discovering that no rehearsal was adequate. She stepped aside. Thomas Carter looked at Eleanor Ashbourne. Eleanor looked at Thomas Carter. Reginald, standing near the door with his hands clasped, was making no pretense of not being moved. His eyes were bright, and he didn't appear to care who saw it. "I owe you," Eleanor began. "Don't," Thomas said, quietly, firmly. "Don't start with what you owe me." "Then where do I start?" she asked, and her voice was not the Duchess's voice. It was smaller than that, more human. The voice of a woman who has been carrying something for so long that she's forgotten how to set it down and needs someone to show her. "Start with why you came," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Because it was past time," she said. "Because I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong, and I let fear keep me from addressing it for 30 years, and then for 2 more years, when I finally knew where to find you." She paused. "Because your daughter walked into my house, and within 48 hours had found everything that should have been found years ago, and I thought if she can walk toward the truth like that, then the least I can do is follow her." Thomas looked at Amelia. "She found the ledgers," he said. It wasn't a question. In approximately 3 hours, Amelia said. Something moved across his face that might in another context have been almost pride. Forsyth, he said. You knew about Forsyth, Amelia said. I suspected. My letter 9 years ago was intercepted, she said. He found it before Eleanor did. He's been using the knowledge of your location as insurance for 9 years. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Is he dealt with? He asked. Julian and the constable are handling it today, Amelia said. He won't be returning to the estate, her father nodded. Once. With the particular economy of movement of a man who considers unnecessary motion a form of imprecision. Sit down, he said, to all of them. Please. It was the word please that struck Amelia. The normalcy of it, the courtesy, the Thomas Carter-ness of it, in this impossible situation. He pulled a chair from near the wall for Eleanor. He brought a stool for Reginald. He remained standing himself, which was, she understood now, his way of maintaining some small measure of control over a situation that was asking him to surrender control entirely. Eleanor sat. She looked at him, standing in his workshop in his working clothes, with his tools on the bench behind him. This man who had once been Alexander Whitmore, who had given up everything, who had built a life from nothing, in a village where no one knew his name, and she said the thing she had come to say. I am sorry, Eleanor said. Not for the decision I made. I made it for Julian, and I would make it again. But for how I made it. For staying silent when I should have spoken. For choosing my family's comfort over your freedom. For spending 30 years convincing myself that because I had no other choice, I had made the right one. She stopped. There is a difference between the only choice and the right one. It took me too long to understand that. Thomas was quiet. His hands were folded in front of him, and Amelia could see that he was choosing each next word with the same care he brought to the most delicate repair work, feeling for the right piece, checking that it fit before committing to the placement. I made my own choice, he said finally. I want you to be clear about that. No one forced me. I saw what was happening, and I chose to step in front of it. A pause. I don't regret the choice. I regret some of what came after. The years of silence. The not knowing. His eyes moved briefly to Amelia. And the not being honest with my daughter about who she came from. You were protecting her, Reginald said from his stool near the door. I was protecting myself, Thomas said. And the honesty of it, direct and unsparing, the honesty of a man who had spent 30 years with nothing but his own conscience for company, was audible in every word. I was afraid that if she knew who I was, she would want to find that world. And I was afraid of what finding it would cost her. He looked at Amelia again. I was wrong about that too. She is more capable of carrying difficult things than I gave her credit for. You think, Amelia said, and her voice came out slightly unsteady, which she attributed to the extraordinary nature of the morning, and not at all to the fact that she was sitting in her father's workshop, listening to him speak honestly about himself for what she suspected was the first time in 30 years. He almost smiled. Almost. There is something else, Eleanor said. She straightened in her chair, the Duchess returning, but gently, as a form of organization rather than armor. I came today because I owe you an apology, and I have given it. But I came also because there are things that need to be done that I cannot do without you. She looked at him steadily. Your name, Alexander Whitmore. It was never legally stripped from you. You were not convicted of anything. The scandal was social, not criminal, which means, don't, Thomas said, which means your name can be restored. Your position can be restored. Not your former family estate that passed to other hands years ago, but your name, your standing, your history, the truth of what actually happened. She paused. Society would know. I would make certain of it. I would tell the truth publicly, completely, about my late husband's actions and what they cost you. And I would restore your name so that every person who ever believed the lie would understand what the truth was. Thomas Carter looked at her for a long time. I am 61 years old, he said. I have been Thomas Carter for 30 years. I have a workshop and a daughter and a life that is, it is a small life, but it is mine, entirely mine. I know, Eleanor said. Why would I want society's recognition now? What would it give me that I don't already have? It would give your daughter, Eleanor said quietly, her grandfather's name, your family's history, a lineage that belongs to her, that she has been denied because of choices made before she was born. A pause. And it would give you the ability to stand in the world as who you actually are. Not hiding, not erasing, not carrying the weight of a false name every day for the rest of your life. The workshop was very still. Amelia had not moved. She was watching her father, the way she watched broken mechanisms completely without interrupting. Waiting for the moment, the internal movement revealed the source of the problem. His face was doing something complicated, something she had never seen before in all her years of watching him. It was the face of a man confronting a door he had believed locked for so long that he'd stopped imagining what was on the other side of it. "I need time," he said. "You have it," Eleanor said. "Not days, more than days." "Take what you need," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." And apparently, she added with a glance toward Amelia that carried something in it that might in a different woman's face have been the very early stages of warmth, "Neither is your daughter." Thomas looked at his daughter. "You're staying," he said. "I'm marrying Julian Ashbourne," she said. "So yes, I'm staying." She held his gaze. "Come with me, Papa. Not to disappear into that house, not to become something you're not, but to stop running from something that stopped chasing you years ago." His jaw tightened. "It's not that simple," he said. "I know it isn't," she said. "I also know that you have spent 30 years teaching me that broken things deserve patient, careful repair. And I am asking you very respectfully to apply that lesson to yourself." He stared at her. She stared back. Reginald made a sound that was definitely a suppressed laugh, disguised inadequately as a cough. Eleanor looked at her hands. Thomas Carter. Alexander Whitmore looked at his daughter for a long moment, with an expression that was complicated and tender, and slightly undone. And then he did something Amelia had not seen him do since she was approximately 7 years old. He sat down, not on his stool. On the actual chair, the one that meant he was done working for now, the one that meant he was choosing to be a person in a room with other people rather than a craftsman at a bench. The chair that meant he had decided at least for this hour to stop. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me about this man my daughter is marrying." The next hour was unlike anything Amelia had experienced in her 25 years. Eleanor talked about Julian, about his character, his choices, the ways he was different from his father, and the ways the father's flaws had taught the son to be better. She spoke about him with the honesty of a mother who was not performing pride, but genuinely recounting a person she had watched grow up and found in the growing to be someone worth knowing. Thomas listened. He asked questions, precise ones, the kind that went to the interior of things rather than the surface. What did Julian do when he was wrong? How did he treat the people who worked for him? What had he sacrificed in his life for something he believed was right? Eleanor answered each one. At some point, without anyone noting the transition, the conversation shifted from Julian to other things, to 30 years of separate lives, to the estate and its problems, to Amelia's account of her first 2 days at Ashbourne Manor, which she told with more detail than she'd intended, and which made her father listen with the absorption of a man receiving a report that matters enormously to him. When she got to the part about the grandfather clock in the parlor, her recognition of his work, her tracing of the crest. Thomas looked at Eleanor. "You kept it," he said. "The clock." "I keep everything that matters," Eleanor said. "The tool," he said. "The one I left." A pause. "I have it with me," Eleanor said. She reached into the small bag she had carried and produced it, the watchmaking tool, old and worn, the twin of the one in Thomas's kit. She set it on the workbench between them. Thomas looked at it for a long moment. He reached out and picked it up. He turned it in his hands the way Eleanor had turned it in hers for 30 years, with the specific attention you give to something that carries more weight than its physical dimensions justify. Then he set it down next to the one from his own kit, which was lying on the bench. 2 tools. Identical. Separated for 30 years. Amelia looked at them sitting side by side and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have an immediate word for. "Papa," she said. "Yes." "The letter, 9 years ago, you wrote to them." He was quiet for a moment. I heard something, he said carefully. From someone in the village who had come from Wiltshire. About the accounts. About Forsyth. He paused. I knew what it meant. I had understood from the early years that the estate was vulnerable, that without someone watching the original books closely, the summaries could be manipulated. He looked at Eleanor. I tried to warn you. The letter never reached me, she said. I suspected as much, he said. When nothing changed. He paused. I should have tried again. Through a different channel. I told myself it wasn't my place anymore. He looked at his hands. That was cowardice. You had already sacrificed enough, Eleanor said. There is no enough, he said. That's not how it works. The question is not what you've already given. The question is what still needs to be done. He said it quietly, simply, with the certainty of a man who had had 30 years to think it through. Eleanor looked at him. Come to Ashbourne, she said. Not to live. Not permanently if you don't want. But come. Let us address this properly, the accounts, Forsyth's prosecution, the restoration of the estate. Julian needs guidance, the kind that I cannot fully give him alone. A pause. The kind that you specifically would know how to give. You're asking me to advise you, he said. I'm asking you to come home, she said. And then, as though she heard what she'd said and recognized it might be too much, or wherever you choose to call home, but to come. To not be in Thornfield while the people who owe you everything sort out the mess that was partly created by your absence. Thomas was quiet. He looked at the two tools on the bench. He looked at his daughter. Amelia said nothing. This was not a moment for her to push. She had said what she needed to say earlier, and she trusted him to find his own way to the answer. She had always trusted him for that, even when his timing was not hers. I would need, he said slowly, to bring my work. Eleanor blinked. Your work. The clock repairs. I have clients, people who depend on me. He said it simply, without apology. I am not abandoning my responsibilities because of a change in circumstances. Of course, Eleanor said, and something shifted in her face. Something that might, Amelia thought, be the very specific expression of a person encountering someone who is fundamentally better than them and knowing it. And I would need my own space, he said. I don't do well in houses where I feel like a guest. You would not be a guest, Eleanor said. I need to hear that from Julian, he said. Not from you, from him. Eleanor nodded. And, he said, and his voice shifted, something quieter underneath the practicality, now something more careful. I need it understood, by everyone who knows and by anyone else who learns, I did not come back for recognition. I did not come back to reclaim something. I came back because my daughter is building her life there, and because... He stopped. Because... Eleanor prompted. He looked at her directly. Because there is still work to be done, he said. And I am not the kind of man who can see work that needs doing and walk away from it. That has never changed. Eleanor looked at Alexander Whitmore, at Thomas Carter, at the man he was, and had always been underneath every name he had carried. No, she said softly. That has never changed. The carriage that left Thornfield that afternoon carried 4 people instead of 3. Thomas Carter had packed a bag with the efficient economy of a man who had spent 30 years being ready to travel light. He had left notes for his 3 most urgent client repairs arranged with his neighbor to watch the workshop, and locked the door with the same key he had used every day for 30 years. He carried his toolkit. He carried the 2 watchmaking tools, both of them wrapped in cloth, and placed in the inside pocket of his coat close to his body. Amelia sat beside him in the carriage. Across from them, Eleanor and Reginald. The first several miles passed in a silence that was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 4 people who have just done something large and are taking a moment to feel the size of it before they move on to what comes next. It was Reginald who spoke first. Well, he said, this is the strangest Tuesday I've had in 30 years. Thomas looked at him. Something crossed his face. Something that started in his eyes and moved slowly outward. Something that took its time, but was unmistakably, undeniably a smile. It was the first time Amelia had seen her father smile like that in years. not the small compressed expression he produced when he found something wryly amusing. A real smile. The smile of a man who has been carrying something alone for so long that the simple presence of other people in the same difficulty is itself a form of relief. "Reginald," he said. "Alexander," Reginald said. "Thomas," Thomas corrected mildly. "For now." "Thomas," Reginald said and smiled back. "Welcome home." Eleanor said nothing, but Amelia saw her look at her brother with an expression that was just briefly, just for one unguarded moment, pure gratitude. They were an hour from Ashbourne when Thomas did something unexpected. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he handed it across to Eleanor. She looked down at it. It was old, yellowed at the folds. The handwriting was familiar to Amelia. Now she had seen it on the letter she found in the estate ledger. "I wrote this 30 years ago," Thomas said. "The morning I left. I had it in my hand to leave with the tool on your doorstep." He paused. "And then I couldn't. I put it in my pocket instead. And I kept it." Eleanor's eyes moved across the page. Amelia could not read it from where she sat. She could only watch Eleanor's face as she watch it change, with the slow inevitability of something that has been held back too long and is finally now being allowed to arrive. When Eleanor looked up, her eyes were bright. "You should have left this," she said. "I know," he said. "I would have—" She stopped. "It would have been different." "I know," he said again. "I was afraid you would try to fix it. And I needed it to not be fixed. Not then. It wasn't fixable then." He looked at his hands. "Some things need more time than they seem to, before the repair is even possible." Eleanor folded the letter carefully. She held it for a moment. Then she held it back out to him. He shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "It was always meant for you." The carriage rolled on. The afternoon light was fading, the particular gold of an autumn late afternoon, going softer, going amber, going toward the first suggestion of evening. Amelia looked out the window and thought about all the things she had learned in 4 days that were going to require the rest of her life to fully understand. She thought about Julian back at the manor handling Forsyth with the constable. Julian, who had come to her father's workshop 6 months ago with honest eyes and stayed. Who had chosen not to tell her the full truth and had been wrong about that, and who she suspected knew he had been wrong and was prepared to account for it. She thought about the estate, the real work ahead of it, the reconstruction of something that had been quietly damaged for 11 years. The genuine work of repairing what Forsyth had taken, and the longer work of rebuilding what the silence of 30 years had cost. She thought about Eleanor sitting across from her now, with a folded letter in her hands, and her back perfectly straight, and her face doing something complicated and private that Amelia was respectful enough not to look at directly. She thought about her father beside her, his shoulder warm against hers, his toolkit between his feet on the floor of the carriage, moving toward a house that had once been the center of everything he'd lost. She thought about what he had said about broken things, all the many versions of the lesson, all the different forms it had taken over her lifetime. How a broken clock did not stop because time disappeared. How the most important piece was almost never the most obvious one. How you found the source before you declared the thing dead. She had spent her entire life thinking he was teaching her about clocks. She understood now that he had been teaching her about everything. The gates of Ashbourne Manor appeared through the carriage window. Thomas Carter looked at them. He breathed in slowly. He breathed out. His hands were steady on his knees. "Papa," Amelia said quietly. "I'm all right," he said. "I know you are," she said. "I just wanted to say I'm glad you came." He looked at her. And that smile again, the real one, the one he almost never let out, the one that was the whole of him. "Someone once told me," he said quietly, "that broken things were never broken beyond repair. They simply required someone with the patience to find the source of the problem." She stared at him. "You taught me that," she said. "I know," he said. "I was reminding myself." The carriage went through the gates, and in the house ahead of them, in the estate office, where the uncorrected ledgers were already being arranged as evidence. Julian Ashbourne looked up from his work as the sound of wheels on gravel reached him through the window. He closed the ledger. He straightened his jacket. He walked to the front entrance and stood at the top of the steps with the expression of a man who is aware he is about to meet someone for the first time, who has been essential to his life since long before he understood how. The carriage door opened. Amelia stepped out first. Behind her, Thomas Carter. Julian looked at the man who had raised the woman he loved. The man who had sacrificed everything and rebuilt his life from nothing, and taught his daughter to walk into impossible rooms without flinching. And he did something that surprised everyone present, including himself. He walked down the steps, and he offered Thomas Carter his hand. Not the way a lord offers his hand to a lesser. The way one man offers his hand to another when he means, I see you. I know what you are. I know what I owe you, even though I cannot yet repay it, and I intend to spend a long time trying. Thomas Carter looked at the hand, then he took it. Lord Ashbourne, he said. Julian said. Please. Thomas considered this. Julian, he said, and the grip held for a moment that was just one moment too long to be merely formal and just right for everything else it needed to be. Eleanor came down the steps behind them. She stood beside Julian, and the four of them were there together in the cooling afternoon air. The Duchess and her son, the clockmaker, and his daughter, and the thing between them that was not yet fully named, but was already real. Come inside, Julian said. It's getting cold. And Thomas Carter walked through the doors of Ashbourne Manor for the first time in 30 years. He did not hesitate at the threshold. He had her father's steadiness after all. He had always had it. He'd just spent 30 years reminding himself it was still there. Thomas Carter had been at Ashbourne Manor for 3 days before he found the second problem. The first problem. Forsyth's decade of systematic theft was already being addressed through proper legal channels. The constable had come and gone. Documents had been assembled and submitted. Julian had handled it with a quiet, methodical thoroughness that Thomas had watched from a respectful distance and found privately impressive. The young man did not panic. He did not grandstand. He simply worked through each step the way you worked through a difficult repair one piece at a time without skipping ahead. Amelia had taught him that Thomas suspected, or rather, Amelia had recognized it in him, which was sometimes the same thing. The second problem was the estate's relationship with its tenant farmers, and Thomas found it not in any ledger, but in a conversation he was not meant to overhear. He was passing through the lower corridor on his way to the room Eleanor had assigned him, a modest one at his specific request, near enough to the east wing to be convenient, but far enough from the formal rooms to feel less like being displayed and more like being present when he heard voices from the steward's room. The new temporary steward, a young man named Graves, who had been elevated from assistant in the crisis, was speaking to a farmer from the South Fields. Thomas slowed down without quite stopping. The farmer was afraid, not of Graves, of losing his lease. Forsyth, it emerged, had been using the threat of lease termination to keep the tenant farmers silent about the irregularities they'd noticed over the years. Several of them had seen discrepancies between what they paid and what was recorded. Supplies that were billed but never delivered, improvements they had been charged for that had never been made. They had stayed quiet because staying quiet was the price Forsyth extracted for their continued tenancy. Thomas walked into the steward's room. Graves looked startled. The farmer looked frightened, the particular fear of a working man who has just been caught telling the truth to someone above his station and doesn't yet know whether that will help or hurt him. "Your name," Thomas said to the farmer. "Alderton, sir. William Alderton. South Quarter, 40 acres. How long have you farmed on this estate?" 22 years, sir. "And how long have you known about the irregularities in the accounts?" A long pause. Alderton looked at Graves. Graves looked at Thomas. Nobody looked particularly comfortable. "About 8 years, sir," Alderton said finally. "Give or take." Thomas nodded. "How many others?" he asked. Others. Other farmers who knew, who stayed silent for the same reason. Alderton's jaw worked for a moment. 6, maybe 7. Families mostly. They've got children on those leases. "I understand," Thomas said. And he did. He understood the arithmetic of that choice, the calculation between truth and safety, between what was right and what your children could afford for you to do. He had made a version of that calculation himself once, and he would not judge anyone else for making it differently. He turned to Graves. I want to meet with every tenant on the South Quarter within the week. All of them. Together, not separately. He paused. And I want it made clear before the meeting that no lease is in jeopardy. Anyone who comes to that meeting comes under the explicit protection of Lord Ashbourne. Whatever they say stays in the room and is used only to correct the record, not to punish anyone who stayed silent. Graves blinked. Sir, I would need Lord Ashbourne's authorization for a commitment like that. Then get it, Thomas said. Tell him it was my suggestion. He'll authorize it. He walked out of the room and went to find Julian. Julian authorized it within 10 minutes, which confirmed Thomas's assessment of the young man's character in a way that no amount of observation from a respectful distance could have accomplished. Julian didn't ask for time to consider. He didn't ask who would be inconvenienced by it or what it would cost politically. He asked one question, is it the right thing to do? Thomas said yes. Julian said done. Amelia, who was sitting across the desk from Julian when Thomas came in and had watched the entire exchange with the expression of a woman who is watching two people she loves understand each other for the first time, said nothing at all. She simply looked at Thomas with an expression he recognized, the look she had given him her entire life when something had confirmed a belief she already held. The look that meant I knew it. I was right. He had never been able to stay stern in the face of that look, not once in 25 years. He didn't manage it now either. He looked away before she could see him smile. The tenant meeting happened 4 days later. 7 families came. Alderton and 6 others. Men and women who arrived with the careful, watchful body language of people who have learned through experience that official meetings are rarely held for their benefit. They sat in the large ground-floor room that Julian had chosen precisely because it was not the formal dining room or the estate office, nowhere that would remind them they were lesser. It was a working room with a long plain table and chairs that were comfortable without being imposing. Thomas sat at the table with Julian on one side of him and Amelia on the other. Eleanor was not present. This had been Thomas's specific request, and Eleanor had honored it without argument, which was itself a measure of how much things had changed in a week. The Duchess's presence, he had explained to her privately, would shift the atmosphere in ways that would make honest testimony more difficult. Eleanor had looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman receiving a correction she finds valid but not entirely pleasant, and then she had said, "You're right," and removed herself from the proceedings. That Thomas thought was perhaps the most remarkable thing that had happened since he arrived. Thomas opened the meeting by telling the farmers who he was. Not Thomas Carter, the clockmaker. Not Alexander Whitmore, the former noble. Just a man who had once known this estate from the outside and was now trying to help set right what had gone wrong inside it. He told them that their silence had been coerced, and that coerced silence was not a moral failing. He told them that what they said in this room would be used to correct the financial record and potentially support legal proceedings, but that their leases were secure and their families were safe regardless of what they chose to share. Then he stopped talking and let them speak. They spoke for 2 hours. What came out of those 2 hours was worse than the ledgers alone had suggested. Forsyth had not only stolen from the estate, he had effectively stolen from the farmers themselves, charging them for services and improvements that were never delivered, pocketing the difference while recording the transactions as completed. The amounts per family were not enormous. Accumulated over 8 years across 7 families, they added up to something significant. More than that, they added up to something personal. Years of quiet grinding injustice endured in silence by people who had no recourse and knew it. When the last family finished speaking, the room was quiet. Julian said, "I am sorry. On behalf of my family and this estate, I am sorry. This should never have happened, and it should have been caught far sooner, and it wasn't, and that is our failure, not yours." Alderton, who had been sitting with his cap in his hands for the entire 2 hours, looked up. He was a large man, not given to visible emotion, the kind of person whose feelings lived mostly in his jaw, in the way it set and released. It released now slightly in the way of someone letting go of something they've been holding for a long time. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Julian said, "we correct the record. Whatever was taken from you, whatever you paid that you shouldn't have, is returned. With interest because you've been without it for years, and that has consequences. And the conditions on your leases are renegotiated to reflect what the actual arrangement should have been had it been managed honestly from the beginning." Alderton was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous offer, my lord," he said carefully, in the voice of a man who has learned to be careful with generous offers. "It's not generosity," Julian said. "It's correction. There's a difference." Thomas heard his own lessons coming out of his daughter's future husband's mouth, and felt something that was not quite pride and not quite vindication, but lived somewhere in the territory between the two. After the farmers left, Julian sat back in his chair and looked at Thomas across the table. "How did you know?" he asked. "About the tenant situation?" "I listened," Thomas said. "I walked slowly through a corridor at the right moment, and I recognized what I heard, because I have spent 30 years listening to people who believe no one in authority is interested in what they have to say." He paused. "You get better at hearing those conversations when you have been one of those people." Julian held his gaze. "Amelia said you were the most important person she had ever known," he said. "I thought she was speaking from love." "She usually speaks from both," Thomas said. Julian smiled. It was the first fully unguarded smile Thomas had seen from him, not the careful, slightly managed expression of a man navigating a complicated household, but the actual thing. Open. Young. The smile of someone who is genuinely happy and has stopped worrying for this moment about whether that's allowed. Thomas decided in that moment that his daughter had made an excellent choice. He kept that assessment to himself, which was his way, and said instead, "We should look at the lease documentation before the end of the week. I want to see the original terms before Forsyth's adjustments. There may be more to correct than what came out today." Julian nodded immediately. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Tomorrow morning." Thomas agreed. What Thomas had not anticipated, what none of them had fully anticipated, was Eleanor. Not what she did in the week after his return. What she said. She came to his workroom on the 7th evening. He had been given a room adjacent to the estate library, which had a large work table he had requisitioned for his clockwork, and which now held the magistrate's pocket watch he had brought from Thornfield, and 2 additional pieces that Julian had quietly produced from various rooms in the house, where clocks had stopped working and been left in a state of respectful abandonment. She knocked. He told her to come in. She entered and looked at the work table with its organized spread of tools and parts, and then looked at him and she said, "I need to tell you something that I should have told you 30 years ago." He set down his tools. He turned to face her. "My husband," she said. "In the last year of his life he tried to find you. He said he wanted to make it right. He said he had been wrong and he knew it, and he wanted to find you and tell you." She stopped. "He died before his investigator found any trace of you. He died knowing he had never made it right." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you deserve to know that he knew," she said. "That he didn't die comfortable with what he had done. That it cost him too in the end." Thomas considered this carefully. He turned it over with the same patient precision he brought to a mechanism that needed understanding before it could be repaired. "It doesn't change what happened," he said finally. "No," she agreed. "But it changes something," he said. He was quiet for another moment. "I spent a long time being angry at him. Longer than I admitted even to myself. The anger it was useful in the beginning. It gave me energy. It helped me build something new." He looked at the work table. "But anger that outlives its usefulness becomes a different kind of damage. I knew that. I tried to put it down." A pause. "Knowing he tried even unsuccessful makes it easier to put the last of it down." Eleanor looked at him. "I have been angry at myself," she said, "for 30 years. "I know," he said. "I don't know how to put it down," she said. It came out quietly, simply stripped of the Duchess entirely, just a woman in her 60s admitting something true. Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "You do the next right thing," he said, "and then the one after that. You don't put the anger down all at once, it's too heavy for that. You put down one piece of it by doing something right, then another piece. And gradually the thing you're carrying becomes lighter, not because you've forgiven yourself, but because you've made yourself into someone worth forgiving. Eleanor looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face in 30 years. She had worn it often once, before the title had settled fully onto her and the weight of it had rearranged her face permanently. Before life had taught her that vulnerability was a strategic liability she could not afford. "You sound," she said, "exactly like yourself." "I've had a long time to practice," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she said, "Amelia is going to be extraordinary." "She already is," he said. "I know," Eleanor said. "I am sorry I didn't see it immediately." "She gave you very little time," he said. And there was something in his voice that might have been the faintest suggestion of amusement, the dry, quiet amusement of a man who is not entirely surprised that his daughter had walked into a hostile situation and immediately begun dismantling it. "No," Eleanor agreed. "She did not." She paused. "She is very much like you." "She is very much like herself," Thomas said. "That is better." The wedding was set for the first Saturday of December. London society, which had been watching the Ashbourne situation with the particular appetite that London society reserved for anything that combined nobility scandal and an unlikely romance, arrived at Ashbourne Manor in numbers that suggested the entire question of Amelia Carter's worthiness had been resolved not by any announcement, but by the simple gravitational force of watching people of consequence treat something as settled. Eleanor had made sure of that. In the 3 weeks between Thomas Carter's return and the wedding, Eleanor Ashbourne had done something she had never done in 60 years of navigating aristocratic society. She had told the truth publicly, completely, and without diplomatic softening. She had written letters, personal ones in her own hand, sent to every family of consequence in their social circle. She had told the story of Alexander Whitmore, who he was, what he had done, why, and at whose expense he had done it. She had named her late husband's role precisely, and without the kind of protective euphemism that families of their class customarily deployed around the failures of their dead. She had said in plain language that the man society had believed to be a scandal had in fact been its opposite, and that the debt this family owed him was one they intended to begin repaying, beginning now. The letters caused an uproar. Not the kind she feared. Something more interesting. The first response came from Lord Hargreaves, who was 80 years old and had known Alexander Whitmore as a young man, and wrote back saying he had always suspected the truth and was glad to see it finally spoken. 3 more followed in the same vein. Then a dozen. Then more. There were, of course, those who were outraged families who had accepted the original story and now found themselves on the wrong side of it, who had treated Alexander Whitmore's disgrace as confirmed truth and now had to reckon with the fact that they had been wrong. But their outrage was the outrage of people caught in an embarrassing error, not the outrage of moral authority, and it carried accordingly less weight. By the time the wedding guests arrived at Ashbourne Manor on that December Saturday, Alexander Whitmore's name had been spoken in enough drawing rooms, across enough dinner tables, in enough circles of actual consequence, that the restoration Eleanor had promised was already well underway. Thomas Carter had read every letter she drafted before she sent it. She had brought them to him one by one in the evenings. She sat across his work table and read them aloud while he worked, and when she finished reading, he put down his tools and told her what he thought, not what she wanted to hear, which she had enough people for, but what he actually thought. Where the language was too protective, where she was softening something that needed to be said plainly, where her instinct to manage the narrative was overriding her commitment to the truth, she took every correction without argument. Which was, Amelia observed from the doorway one evening, watching the two of them at the work table with letters spread between them. Possibly the most remarkable thing she had seen in a month that contained a great many remarkable things. She told Julian about it later that night. "My father is correcting the Duchess of Ashbourne's prose," she said, "and she is thanking him for it." Julian considered this. "Are you surprised?" "I am surprised by almost nothing anymore," she said honestly. I think Ashbourne Manor has cured me of surprise. Is that good? He asked. She thought about it. Yes, she said. I think it is. He took her hand. They were sitting in the small parlor, the one with the grandfather clock, which Thomas had repaired in his first week, which now kept perfect time and had been running without irregularity since the day he put it back together. She could hear it from where she sat. Steady. Reliable. Marking off seconds with the clean, even tick of something that had been properly understood and properly fixed. Amelia, Julian said. I need to say something. She looked at him. I should have told you the truth from the beginning, he said. When I came to Thornfield, I should have told you why I was there. I should have told you what I knew about your father and my family. I didn't, because I was afraid that if I told you, you would refuse to let me come back. And I wanted to come back. He paused. That was selfish. I put what I wanted above your right to understand your own situation. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. You should have told me. He absorbed this without deflecting it. You were also, she said, 24 years old and in an impossible position with a mother who had kept a secret for 30 years and a father who had done the same, and you were trying to repair something that had been broken before you were born. She paused. I'm not forgiving you because I'm being generous. I'm forgiving you because you did a genuinely difficult thing and you did most of it right, and the part you got wrong, you're accounting for honestly. She looked at him steadily. Don't do it again. I won't, he said. Good, she said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. From the clock in the corner. The steady tick continued. The morning of the wedding, something happened that none of them expected. Thomas Carter came downstairs at 7 in a suit. Not his working clothes. Not the neat but plain attire he had worn every day since arriving. A proper suit, dark and well cut. The kind of suit that had been packed at the bottom of a bag he had carried from Thornfield and that Amelia had not known existed. He came into the breakfast room where Eleanor and Reginald and Julian were already gathered, and he sat down and poured tea and said nothing, as though wearing a suit to breakfast was a perfectly ordinary occurrence. Everyone looked at him. He looked back. What? He said. Nothing, said Reginald, in the voice of a man exercising tremendous restraint. Eleanor was looking at Thomas with an expression that was carefully arranged and not quite succeeding. You look well, she said. I look like myself, he said. As it turns out, Julian cleared his throat. There is something I wanted to ask you, both of you. He looked from Thomas to Eleanor. We have spoken about restoring Alexander Whitmore's name publicly. Eleanor has already begun that process, and it is progressing well. He paused. But I wanted to ask Thomas specifically, not as a formality, as an actual question. Thomas set down his teacup. When you are ready, Julian said, and only when you are ready and completely on your terms, would you consider using your name again? Not to erase Thomas Carter, not to pretend the last 30 years were something other than what they were, but to exist in the world as both, to be Alexander Whitmore, when that name serves the truth, and Thomas Carter, when that name is what fits. He paused. Your daughter is about to become part of this family. I would like her father to be able to stand beside her as the full truth of who he is. The table was quiet. Thomas looked at Julian for a long time. Then he looked at Eleanor. She was watching him with her hands folded and her face very still, in the way she held still when she was trying to give someone room to reach their own answer without the weight of her presence bearing on it. It was the most restrained he had ever seen her, and it cost her something, and he saw that it cost her, and it mattered. He looked at Amelia. She was looking at him with the expression he had loved her entire life. Open, direct, without agenda, completely present. The expression that said, whatever you decide, I am here. Whatever you decide, I am yours. He looked at his hands that had worked for 30 years in a village workshop, that had repaired 10,000 broken things, that had held his daughter when she was small and frightened, that had been the steadiest part of him through every year of the life he had built from nothing. Thomas Carter's hands, Alexander Whitmore's hands, the same hands. Ask me again, he said, in a year. Julian nodded. A year, he said. Ask me then, Thomas said. And the answer may be different. He picked up his teacup. Today, he said, we have a wedding. The ceremony was held in the Ashbourne chapel, which was old and small and perfect for the purpose. Julian stood at the front with Reginald beside him as his witness, and Julian's expression as Amelia walked in was the kind of expression that people spend their whole lives hoping to produce in someone else's face, open, undisguised, completely undone by happiness. Amelia walked in with her father. Thomas Carter walked his daughter down the aisle of a chapel in the house that had once taken everything from him, and he held her arm with the steady certainty of a man who has decided that what a place once was does not determine what it becomes, and that the measure of a life is not what it cost you, but what you built from the cost. He placed her hand in Julian's. He held it for one extra second, just one with both of his. Then he let go. He took his seat in the front row beside Eleanor. She was already sitting very straight, very still with her hands folded in her lap. She did not look at him when he sat down. But after a moment, she moved just slightly, just enough, and her posture changed, and she was no longer sitting with the careful distance of a duchess, maintaining appropriate space, but with the unconscious ease of someone who has decided finally that the person beside them is safe. He did not comment on it. He watched his daughter marry the man who had come to a small workshop in Thornfield, and looked at a stranger's face and recognized something worth staying for. After the ceremony and the brief quiet between the chapel and the reception, Eleanor found him standing alone near the old clock in the hall. He had a hand against its case, a habit he had developed since repairing it, checking the vibration, confirming it was still running true. "It keeps perfect time now," she said. "It needed someone to find the broken piece," he said. "Once you find it, the repair is straightforward." She stood beside him. They looked at the clock together for a moment. "Alexander," she said. Not the Duchess saying it this time. Not formally. Just his name spoken by a person who had known him when he was young and had carried the sound of it for 30 years in the place where carried things go. He looked at her. 30 years ago," she said, "you left a tool on my doorstep and walked away, and I kept it because I didn't know how to let you go, even when I had already failed to keep you." She paused. "I think I have been trying to give it back for 30 years, and I didn't know how to do that either." He was quiet. "You gave it back," he said, "when you came to Thornfield." She looked at him. "And I gave it back," he said, "when I got in the carriage." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very simply, "Thank you." "For what specifically?" he asked. "For coming back," she said. For letting this be possible." She gestured slightly toward the sound of voices and music from the reception room toward Julian and Amelia and the life being built in the next room. "You could have refused. You had every right to refuse." "I had a daughter to walk down an aisle," he said. "That isn't the only reason," she said. He looked at the clock. "No," he said, "it isn't." The reception lasted until late. Amelia danced with Julian and with Reginald, and late in the evening with her father, a slow, old-fashioned dance that Thomas Carter performed with the precise, unhurried competence of a man who had learned it a lifetime ago and found that the body remembers what the mind sometimes tries to forget. "You can dance," she said. "I could always dance," he said. "You never danced in Thornfield." "There was no one to dance with," he said. And then quietly, with the particular smile she had loved her entire life, "There is now." She held on to him a moment longer than the music required. He let her. Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone, and the house had settled into the quiet aftermath of a day that had been too full for easy summarizing, Amelia stood alone in the small parlor with the grandfather clock. She listened to it tick. Perfect. Steady. Every second measured and delivered without deviation. She thought about her father in his suit, walking her down the aisle with his steady hands. She thought about Eleanor sitting beside him in the chapel, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She thought about Julian's face when she walked in, and Reginald's tears, which he had not bothered to hide, and which had made her love him completely. She thought about what her father had said in the carriage 5 weeks ago, holding the watchmaking tool in his hands. Some things need more time than they seem to, before the repair is even possible. She put her hand against the clock's case. Felt the vibration of the mechanism inside, steady true. Carrying its repaired self forward through time, with the quiet confidence of something that has been properly understood. Her father had fixed it. He had fixed a great many things, it turned out, most of them without anyone noticing. That was the nature of the best repairs. They became invisible eventually. They became simply the way things worked. The history of the damage remained if you knew how to read it. But the thing itself moved forward, functioning as it was always meant to, carrying the accumulated weight of its repair inside it, like a kind of earned strength. She understood now why he had sent her, not because he couldn't come himself. Not only that, but because some repairs required someone who was not carrying the original damage, someone who could walk into a broken room and see it clearly, without the distortion of old grief. Someone who had been taught to find the source before declaring the thing dead. Someone who had spent her entire life being prepared without knowing it for exactly this. He had sent her because she was the part of him that wasn't broken. He had raised her to be the person neither of them could have been alone. And she had walked into Ashbourne Manor 5 weeks ago with her best dress and her father's lessons, and nothing else. And she had found the broken piece, and she had held it steady, and the repair had taken. That was what she was. That was what she had always been. The clockmaker's daughter, who knew that broken things were never broken beyond repair. They simply required someone patient enough, and brave enough, and stubborn enough to find the source. And then the courage to stay and do the work until the thing ran true again.